Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
We will get started here in a minute, so if we can gather. So, good morning. I have met many of you in the room, but for those I have not yet met, my name is Melanie Snyder. I serve as the Executive Director of the Lancaster County RMO. It is a reentry coalition that has been up and running in Lancaster County for 10 years now. And the actual words that those letters RMO stand for are bureaucratic and overwhelming. It's the Reentry Management Organization. But what I like to say is that we offer resources, mentoring, and opportunities to people with criminal backgrounds. And so that's what we're about. And I would like my co-presenter this morning to introduce herself, and then we will get started.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think we'll hold it.
My name is Charla, and I am the Reentry Coordinator for the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. What I do is travel around the state and help counties create reentry coalitions so that when folks are coming home from prison, whether it be from federal, state, or local county jails, they have services in place and the community embraces them and helps them to be successful, also while they're maintaining public safety. So we'll be talking about that a lot through the next hour and a half. Thank you.
All right. So our topic this morning is reentry, redemption, what communities and churches can do. And I can tell you that I have come to the conclusion that the faith community has a huge role to play here. And but in order to be prepared to play that role, I think there's some foundational things that it's important for us to take a look at. So what we're hoping to do this morning, Phil, if you could advance one slide. What we would like to do is talk a little bit about who is in our prisons, why they are there, what happens to people while they're incarcerated, some potential lingering effects of incarceration, and the realities of reentry, some of the collateral consequences, the ways that we continue to punish people even after they have completed their time in prison. We're going to talk about what's happening around Pennsylvania with the formation of reentry coalitions and many reentry coalitions that are already up and running, and then really dive deeply into the role for churches. And I see many of you scrambling to take notes. I will tell you, I spoke with Sandy a little while ago. She is going to be talking with all of you about sharing the contact information of everybody who has been at this conference this weekend. And I will then be happy once I receive that contact list of all of you to send a copy of my PowerPoint out to everyone so that you will have it. I'd be happy to share it. Okay, next slide. So before we can really think about what is our role as churches with regard to assisting people in the reentry process, I think it's important to understand who's in our prisons, why they're there, and what happens while they are there. You likely, hopefully, have heard some of these statistics. 1 out of every 104 American adults is currently incarcerated right now, today. 1 in 104. 1 in every 33 American adults is under some form of correctional system control. So that would be incarceration, house arrest, probation or parole supervision, electronic monitoring, and so forth. 1 in 33. And it's estimated that now 1 in every 4 American adults has a criminal record from some point in their past. 1 in 4. So look around the room, folks. Next slide. This really shows the staggering growth in our prison population in the past 4 decades. A 677% increase in numbers of people that we are incarcerating in the 40-year period from 1971 to 2011. Absolutely staggering ramp up in our incarcerated population, largely because we have implemented a lot of new laws in that time that have served to lock more and more people up for more and more types of things that we've decided to categorize as crime. We're locking people up for longer and longer periods of time as well. So, who are these 2.3 million people that we currently have locked up in the United States? As we've been hearing throughout this conference, they are disproportionately people of color because of some intentional, structural, racist policies that we have implemented to swoop up large numbers of African American, Hispanic, Latino, especially young men, and put them in our prisons. 80% of the people in our prisons across the United States are low income, and 66% of them report that they were living below the poverty level before being incarcerated. So we are criminalizing poverty.
Question is, could that slide be any more focused?
Is there a focus?
Yeah, there's a focus.
It's not saying focus on, yeah.
Better, thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Okay. We also have criminalized addiction. So instead of treating people for their addictions, we incarcerate. 66 to 75% of all the people in our prisons across the United States have a history of addiction or substance abuse. We also criminalize mental health needs. 64% of the people in our prisons have a mental health diagnosis, and serious mental illness is 2 to 4 times higher among the population of people who are in our prisons than in the general population. GP stands for general population. 50% of the people in our prisons have learning disabilities, as compared to 15% of people in the general population. 40% of the people in our prisons lack a high school diploma. Many of the people in our prisons, and we've heard this from a number of other speakers, many of the people in our prisons have at some point in their lives been victims of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, violence, trauma, abuse and neglect. 25, now this is a huge range, I understand, 25 to 80% of people in our prisons are believed to have traumatic brain injuries. And we are increasingly locking up women. Now, the conditions in prison, and I do apologize, I realize the background is pretty dark, but the conditions while people are in prison, you are in very tight quarters with total strangers, strangers that you may be terrified of due to their criminal background. Constant noise, a lack of sunlight, lights are left on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no privacy, extremely overcrowded. There's a culture of manipulation, power and control and distrust in our prison system that's just part of the system itself. Exploitation is very common. Rape is incredibly common. So common that our federal government actually had to pass a law to say we need to pay attention to the problem of rape in our prisons, and we need to make sure that correctional staff in our prisons are doing all they can to prevent rape. It's staggering to me that we had to pass a law to address that issue. And then, as many have spoken about throughout this conference, the torture of solitary confinement, a very commonly used tool in correctional settings. There are many lingering impacts of this culture and these conditions of confinement. People learn not to trust anyone. There's a sense of hypervigilance from constantly having to be aware of your surroundings, constantly having to be aware of the danger, the violence, the potential risk to your life and safety while you're incarcerated. And that carries over to people when they are released. People may withdraw socially, they may isolate themselves just to avoid having to deal with the risks of interacting with other people. People come out of prison with PTSD because of the horrific conditions that they have been exposed to while they're inside. And trauma, if people have experienced other forms of trauma, violence, abuse throughout their lives, the conditions of confinement can re-trigger that trauma and lead them to be re-traumatized over and over and over again. Now, we know that approximately 90% of all people who we do incarcerate will be released someday, but 1 out of every 2.3 of them will be reincarcerated within 3 years. And we're going to look in a little while at some of the reasons that people wind up reincarcerated. It's not necessarily because they have committed new crimes. Next slide. Okay, so those are some of the realities of who is in our prisons, some of the factors that have led to them being there, what happens to them while they are there. When they come out, they continue to face numerous negative consequences and barriers. So let's take a look at a few of those. With regard to housing, it is incredibly difficult for people to find places to live. Landlords don't want to rent to someone who has a criminal background. Landlords now are doing background checks. Next slide, or next. People can't afford, they come out, people get released often with nothing but the clothes on their back. They have no source of income, it's difficult for them to find a job, and so how would they even pay for an apartment? Monthly rent, let alone coming up with the initial sum of money required for a security deposit, first month's rent. And there are some landlords who, if they see someone has a criminal background, and if they decide they are willing to rent, they will demand security deposit, first month's rent, and last month's rent. So you could be looking at thousands of dollars people have to come up with just to get into a first apartment. Not in my backyard, NIMBY. People resist, people in our communities resist having someone with a criminal background living near them. People in some of our communities in Lancaster County have actually turned out in mass and protested when when a couple of returning citizens were being invited to move into a home that someone was going to be supervising them, mentoring them, started putting signs in their front yards, keep criminals out of our community. Really horrific things that come along with this not in my backyard kind of mindset. And then for people who have a sexual offense on their record, the resistance, the barriers become even more significant. And in fact, in the December of 2013, I believe it was, Pennsylvania finally implemented the last pieces of what was known as the Federal Walsh Act. Many of us know about the Megan's Law database, which is the registry for people who've committed sexual offenses. Well, under the Walsh Act, there are some new additional requirements for anyone convicted of a sexual offense. One of those requirements is that local law enforcement or probation and parole are actually required to go into a community where someone with a sex offense is going to be living and distribute flyers with a photograph of the individual, their name, where they're going to be living, where they will be working if they have a job, the make and model and license plate number of the car they drive. Talk about a scarlet letter. I mean, why don't we just, line them up and brand them on their forehead? It's absolutely insane. So the Walsh Act has implemented even more barriers for people with sexual offenses. Next slide. I said earlier that we have criminalized addiction and mental health issues. And so for people who get released from prison, who have a history of addiction, who have a history of mental health issues, first of all, in many local and county jails, people are released sometimes at very strange hours of the day or night. For example, in Lancaster County, people are released from our county prison at either 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night. They are released with a 3-day supply of any medication they may have been on while they were in prison. Well, a 3-day supply of any kind of medication, health-sustaining meds, mental health meds, is not going to be nearly enough to get an appointment with a physician, to get a renewal, let alone how are you going to pay for an appointment with a doctor? How are you going to pay for a renewal of your prescription? So there are a couple of really key things. Go ahead, and there are, I think, 3 or 4 points here. So medications, access to insurance, the cost of insurance, the cost of treatment, and access to treatment are huge issues for people who come out with addictions and mental health needs. Next slide. The families also suffer. Go ahead, I think there are about 5 points here for families. So the families have been separated during the loved one's incarceration. Many times, the correctional system uses a, I think might be referred to as a sort of carrot and stick approach to where an individual is sent for their term of incarceration. Within the state system in Pennsylvania, people are often sent to a prison that is pretty far away from their family, far away from their home. Now, sometimes they are told, okay, if you toe the line, if you behave yourself, if you follow the rules, if you do all the required programming, maybe at some point we'll move you to a prison that is closer for your family to visit. But I personally know of families that have to take 6, 7, 8-hour drives or bus rides to visit their loved one who is incarcerated. Huge cost. It takes an enormous toll on the families. And quite often, as a result, families simply aren't able to do it. And so the incarcerated person and their family eventually just start losing contact, drifting away from one another. There are many financial impacts on the family during a loved one's incarceration. First of all, during the initial arrest, trial, legal proceedings, there may be court costs, legal fees that the family is bearing that burden. While someone is incarcerated, they often have to pay while they're in prison for things like soap and shampoo, a phone card to make phone calls to their loved ones. for-profit companies operate the commissary, the phone services, the health services. People in the state prisons in Pennsylvania have to pay if they get sick and need to see a nurse while they're incarcerated, or if the nurse prescribes any kind of medication, they have to pay for those medications. So all of these costs really start mounting up for the families. And the for-profit companies that are running these services inside our prisons charge exorbitant rates for soap and shampoo and medical services and phone cards. So they are taking advantage. And then there's another set of for-profit companies that operate kiosks that are usually either an online system or an actual kiosk in the lobby of local county jails, where a family member can put money on the books for their loved one who's incarcerated. But here's what happens with those kiosks and those online, putting money on the books systems. They charge a fee for the family to put money on their loved one's books. And then the correctional system, county jails, state prisons, federal prisons in many places, will immediately take a percentage of whatever money is put on the inmate's books and use it to pay for, to put against the individual's court-imposed fines and costs, any restitution that they owe. So money just gets siphoned right off the top of anything that the family member might put on their loved one's books. The other things that happen when a family member returns home or returns to the community after prison is there can be enormous strain, anger and resentment by the family over the impacts of that loved one's incarceration. Sometimes the family dynamics have changed. Depending on how long that individual has been away, there may be a new significant other in the life of the mother of the children or the father of the children who's been taking care of things. There may be contact restrictions that say you aren't allowed to go back to your family. Sometimes for children, if a parent has been away for a long time, they may look at that parent and say, you don't have the right to tell me what to do anymore. You don't have the right to discipline me anymore. You haven't been here. So really deep-rooted changes and harm within the family structure that happens as a result of the loved one's incarceration. Next slide. Another area, go ahead, and there are 3 or 4 bullet points here. Another area is employment. Quite often people are told when they get released, their PO may say to them, you need to have a job within 30 days. You better be working and you better start making payments on your fines and costs, those court fees that you owe. Well, not only does the individual have that criminal record now, which is a tremendous barrier to finding a job, but they may not even have any forms of identification. They may not have a driver's license or photo ID anymore. They may not know where their birth certificate or social security card is. And you cannot get a job, at least not an above-the-table job. You can get under-the-table jobs, but you can't get a legitimate job if you can't supply several forms of ID that prove that you're an American citizen and you have the right to work in this country. People quite often lack education. We saw earlier 50% of the people in our prisons lack a high school diploma. Many have learning disabilities. Many of them lack basic workplace skills. Some people, depending on the nature of their sort of criminal history, when they went into prison, how young they were when they first went to prison, they may never have even had any kind of history of holding a job and knowing what that's like. Depending on what circumstances they grew up in, they may not have had any role models at home for what getting up and going to a job on a daily basis looks like. How does that work? What is that all about? And lack of transportation is another huge barrier. So if people can't get to a job, how are they going to get to a job? Go ahead. Next slide. That's okay. Here's another thing that is starting to get some attention at the national level, and that is that we have created a structure that really returns us to the days of debtors' prisons. And a number of national organizations have published extensive reports about this. The ACLU, Human Rights Watch, a few others have published some reports about the staggering level of debt that we impose on people who are caught up in our criminal justice system. Now, I'm going to say, I am a trained restorative justice mediator, and I do believe in restitution. I do believe in having some form of compensation that those who have caused harm should, by rights, restore to the individual or individuals that they have harmed. And so I sort of hold restitution, and this is just me personally, I sort of hold restitution in a little bit separate category because I do believe that that's an important symbolic and tangible gesture from someone who has caused harm to help restore at least some piece of that harm they've caused to their victims or survivors. But we also impose a lot of additional financial penalties. So what has started happening is if you look at the docket sheet for someone, let's say, who is incarcerated at the Lancaster County Prison on, let's say, some low-level drug possession charges, you'll see some things on their list of fines and costs like the $29.95 court automation upgrade fee and the $11.50 bail administration processing fee and the $300 booking fee. So we've started just adding fee after fee after fee. And so someone who goes into Lancaster County Prison for, again, a low-level drug possession charge may actually come out with several $1,000s of court fees that have been imposed. In addition, many county jails are starting to charge room and board for the people who are incarcerated there. And when those people get released, they send them a bill for their room and board. And in some counties, because the counties have not been satisfied with the collection rate that they have been able to achieve, chasing people down to get them to pay their room and board or their court fines and fees, a number of counties are turning over those debts to collection agencies that add collection fees and interest. In addition, probation and parole departments charge supervision fees. They'll charge a standard monthly supervision fee, and then God help you if you have been required to wear an electronic monitor, or even worse, what's called a scram bracelet, which is an alcohol. It's a thing that's clamped onto you that constantly measures and reports back to a centralized computer system your blood alcohol level, if you have alcohol in your system. Those monitors, they charge a daily fee for those, racking up additional hundreds of dollars of debt that people owe. Many people, when they come out, are mandated to participate in certain drug and alcohol, domestic violence, anger management classes. And all of the entities that are offering those classes, or many of them, charge a fee for those classes. And then, if you don't participate in the required programs, if you don't go, many people when they come out are required to go get a drug and alcohol evaluation, which usually costs a couple of $100s. Many people are required to go get a mental health evaluation or a psychiatric evaluation, which costs several $100s. And if you do not do all of these things that are required as the conditions of your probation and parole, and if you do not make payments against all of these fines and costs, not only are you subject to late fees, interest, penalties by the collection agencies, but you are at risk of being reincarcerated for non-payment. So we have absolutely reinstituted debtor's prison in this country. It's appalling. Next slide. Have I overwhelmed you yet? I'm going to get to some good stuff, I promise. I do promise. Okay. Go ahead and run through these, or 3 or 4 here. Oh, yeah, you just go back. So some of the additional challenges. You all are, how many of you right now are feeling a little overwhelmed, a little stressed? Raise your hand. Okay. So imagine if this was you personally that had all of this going on, right? Feeling overwhelmed, feeling completely isolated, feeling deep shame and stigma. You have been branded ex-felon, criminal, ex-con, and it quickly leads to a sense of hopelessness. And I have heard the people that we walk with in Lancaster County in our reentry program say, there have been times when I've thought, you know what? Forget it. They use different terminology. This is a church group, so I won't say what they say, but they say, forget it. I'm just going to go commit another crime, let them put me back in, and, you know, it's too hard out here. It's too hard. And then we get to something called collateral consequences. How many of you have heard of collateral consequences? Has anyone heard this term? A few people? Okay, so next slide. Let's take a look at these. Go ahead and just, I'm sorry, this presentation has all these like one by one, and that just drives me nuts. Okay, so collateral consequences are federal and state laws, local ordinances, and sometimes agency policies that impose additional restrictions on people simply because they have a criminal record. Now this is after they've served their time in prison, okay? We have this notion of paying your debt to society. People who have been in prison, people who have a criminal record, really never get out from under this debt that they supposedly owe to society. So we have laws in America that restrict people's access to housing once they have a criminal record, that restrict their ability to get certain types of jobs or occupational licenses, that restrict their family and parental rights, that restrict their access to government benefits like food stamps, any form of the forms of welfare assistance. They have long-term criminal justice supervision and added restrictions there. We have laws that restrict their access to education and student loans for education. In many states in the U.S., people cannot vote again once they have a felony record. In some states, that restriction, that felony disenfranchisement is permanent. Or they have a process that is so long and so bureaucratic and so complicated that no one can afford to actually go through the process to get their voting rights restored. And then our registration requirements for people who have been convicted of sexual offenses are extensive. The American Bar Association became so concerned about these laws that continue to impose collateral consequences, that continue to impose these restrictions, that they actually created a comprehensive database that you can go and look up by state what are the laws in Pennsylvania that restrict certain types of access to these things. So on the next slide, I have a few examples or a few numbers for you. So in Pennsylvania, we have 24 different laws that limit people's access to housing once they have a criminal record. We have 22 different laws that restrict people's access to governmental benefits. And get this one, 679 laws that restrict people's access or ability to go into certain types of employment or get certain occupational licenses. Now, some of these make absolute sense. Obviously, we do not want people who've been convicted of sexual offenses working in daycare centers or nursing homes. Obviously, we do not want people who have committed crimes of financial fraud or embezzlement working in banks or financial institutions. But I've got to tell you, 679 laws, I've gone and looked at some of them and my eyes have glazed over. Many of them are written in very generic language. For example, a number of our laws in Pennsylvania restrict people's ability to get a barber's license for something called crimes of moral turpitude. Now, for all I know, I have probably committed a couple of those this morning, and it's only 9:15. Crimes of moral turpitude. So these laws just impose penalty after penalty after penalty on people. Again, some of them make sense. Some of them, I think, all reasonable people could agree, yes, that's a good idea. But some of them are just unnecessarily harsh and restrictive. And some of these restrictions are permanent. Even after the person has completed their time in prison or jail, even after they've completed their probation or parole, even after they've paid off all their fines, costs, and restitution, they have additional penalties. So we never let people forget that once a criminal, always a criminal. Next slide. And then the trap of the system. And this is all those probation and parole restrictions. People are threatened with being reincarcerated if they miss a meeting with their PO, don't make payments on their fines and costs, don't attend the required drug and alcohol treatment or mental health treatment, if they leave the county without permission, if they move, let's say they get evicted or they change their phone number or their cell phone gets stolen and they have to get a new phone number, if they don't notify their PO within a very short window of time, they'll be written up on what's called whereabouts unknown. And a warrant will be put out for their arrest, and they will be reincarcerated. Next slide. All right, so now that I've thoroughly depressed you and overwhelmed you, what can we do? What are communities doing? What are churches doing? And so we're going to talk a little bit, and Charla is going to come up and talk a little bit about some of the work that's being done with reentry coalitions around Pennsylvania. And then we'll wrap up with some of the specific ways and roles for churches to play in that.
Is everybody thoroughly depressed right now?
Pretty much.
I think that there's no hope. There's no way for anybody who ever comes home from prison to do anything but fail. That was pretty depressing.
Good, that was my intent.
But
I wanted you to feel a little bit of what the people we work with every day feel.
But it is a reality. And thank God we serve a God of second, third, and fourth chances, right? So, what's going on and why is the state, or has the state decided that they want to do something about reentry? Well, part of it is because it costs a lot of money to keep people incarcerated. And we understand that counties, as well as the state, are really starting to feel the pinch of the millions and millions of dollars that it costs to keep people incarcerated. At PCCD, which is PA Commission on Crime and Delinquency, one of the people, the bodies that we serve are counties. So across the state, we have helped implement criminal justice advisory boards. We have 67 counties in the state, and we have 65 criminal justice advisory boards. Almost every county has a criminal justice advisory board. These criminal justice advisory boards are tasked with ensuring that there's linkage and collaboration around whatever criminal justice issue is important or pertinent or an issue of concern to that county. And within those criminal justice advisory boards, they meet mostly quarterly, sometimes monthly, and they are tasked by us to come up with a with a strategic plan for whatever kind of services or operations they want to do for criminal justice. So once PCCD formed the Reentry unit, which that's me, I'm the whole unit, they tasked the CJAPs with creating reentry committees or subcommittees or reentry coalitions. So these reentry coalitions consist of folks who deal with people coming home from prison. There's probation, parole at the table, mostly state and or federal and local. There are faith-based communities at the table. There are judges there. There are also,
That's okay, there's a slide that has the list too.
there are judges there. There are providers of services, be it housing, education, employment. All these folks need to be at this reentry table. And they are tasked with looking at what the day-to-day operations are for having people come home from prison. What happens when a person leaves the jail? Where are the barriers? Where are the gaps in services? And for the most part, there are many, as you can see, but they're also able to assess what's going on and where they need to implement services. So right now, we have about 15 counties that have reentry subcommittees across the state. Dauphin County is one of them. I think we have that somewhere.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going. One more. Here it is.
Okay. So right now, these are the counties that have reentry coalitions. I have 2 more years before I can retire. Hopefully, I'll get to all 67, 65 counties that have a coalition. But the work of the coalition is very, very important because they really do enable these counties to identify the complex needs of returning citizens. Well, let me back up. They actually have them identify what they want to call people coming back from prison. Some folks like to call them ex-offenders or ex-cons, but we prefer to call them returning citizens because that's what they are. Yes, ma'am.
I probably wasn't listening very carefully, but where do reentry coalitions belong? Are they part of the Commission on Crime and Delinquency? Are they informal coalitions?
They belong within the county. Each county, as I talked about the criminal justice advisory boards,
Yeah.
there's 65 criminal justice advisory boards across the state. So each one of those counties has the opportunity to create a reentry coalition.
Charla, would you
So
like an
that-
example?
Criminal Justice Advisory Board?
I'm sorry?
It's coming from the Criminal Justice Advisory Board?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like an example?
There's examples, right. Pressick?
The Capital Region Ex-Offender Support Coalition was organized in 2005 at a real push from our United Way, which was already working with a homelessness coalition that was better organized, that was getting federal grants in the coalition and not at local agencies. And we incorporated as a nonprofit, got 501c3, and we don't bring to the table all the actors that you saw on the slide, but we have probation parole, we have faith-based nonprofits, we have individual ministries, state and local probation parole, and we have always had what we used to call ex-offenders, now more motivated to call them returning citizens, as part of our management. The immediate past president did federal time, the current president did time, for example, in many jails, then got a master's in counseling and worked in a county jail for 20 years. So we are inherently accountable to the people we serve because the people we serve are part of our organization. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. One of the things we found, though, there have been many counties that have formed coalitions such as Capital Region Ex-Offender Support, and Berks County also had a reentry program prior to us coming in. The process that we're using though with PCCD is really identifying what the services are that each county needs. Because we find that there are a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of things, but we also realize that recidivism rates across the counties are very high. So that means that some of the things that are being done are not helpful. So as part of the process of this Reentry Coalition, we asked them to go back and look at what are you doing, is it working, what's not working, and then those are the things that you need to change. Part of the other question, I'm sorry, you have a question?
I didn't want to interrupt you, I'm sorry. In a mental hospital, I've just been told by people that have been in prison and been committed to the mental hospital from prison, when they are at the mental hospital, no matter how long they're there, all the time that they serve there, basically serve because they're doing programs, trying to heal, become well, they have to go back to prison, and none of the time they spend in that mental hospital counts for their time served in prison.
Is that county?
It's
County, state?
Well, the county that I'm in is Berks County.
Okay. It may very well be true, but part of this process, though, has the counties look at some of those policies that need to be changed, and that clearly is probably a policy that needs to be looked at by that county.
So it doesn't seem right. That,
Well, it depends on what the policy and procedure is for that county. They may determine that it's not, because they're not in an institution, a penal institution, that it doesn't count towards your time. But again, that's part of the process of the Reentry Coalitions. To have the judges at the table, to have the DAs at the table, to have Department of Corrections at our tables, probation, parole, and look to see what kind of stipulations do they have in place that just aren't fair and are really helping people to be unsuccessful.
We are going to have a few minutes for Q&A at the end, so if we could, hold off for just a moment.
So again, what these reentry coalitions allow counties to do is to identify the barriers and consequences, identify the disconnected services, reveal the conflicting programs. A lot of times we have people going to a whole bunch of things. Like you have to be at your anger management class at 10 a.m., then you have to report back to your PO by 2 o'clock, and then you have to be over for the domestic violence training by 5 o'clock. I mean, it's really, we as normal people, daily working folks, could not do all those things in the course of the day. So why are you trying to impose those kinds of barriers on people who are already faced with a multitude of barriers? So we have to be realistic and we have to be human about this. We also have to understand that counties and communities, churches, people have been going back and forth to prison forever. When they come home, there have been services that have been provided by churches. There are services that have been provided by community organizations. What we realize now is that churches and community organizations can't be everything or all things to everybody. So we ask you to look at what it is that you do well and do that well. If your base is that you are really good at, you may have some retired teachers in your community and they enjoy doing resume writing or helping folks with their GED, then you do that. And if there's another church across the street that feeds people or gives them clothes, send them over there. So this opportunity, this Reentry Coalition gives folks the opportunity to look at their communities and see who's doing what well, to see what's not working, because that's really it. And those are the things that you don't want to ask funding for. It helps the county, because the Criminal Justice Advisory Boards are the ones who will apply for funding. PCCD is a funding agency, so we do most of the funding for criminal justice programs, projects, activities across the state. We also fund Department of Corrections and Probation and Parole. So we fund a lot of people. But when I get an application and I'm going to look to see what kind of collaboration is going on there, who are you working with, what are your goals and objectives, have you actually created a reentry plan, do you have a strategic plan, does that county have a strategic plan? And we also realize that sometimes the counties and cities where we have the most need don't work together. For example, Chester City has a huge need. They have a lot of people coming back to Chester City from prison. Harrisburg City has a huge need, and it's not necessarily the same needs that a Dauphin County would have. So we want to see what is it that's going to be pertinent to that community where the most people are coming back home to see where the disconnects are, where the gaps in services are. And that's really the work of the Reentry coalitions. It's kind of going against the grain, but it's getting down in the trenches. And that's where we need to be with this work. You can't afford to sit high and look low and point fingers because it costs the county a lot of money, the counties. Dauphin County spent $8.2 million over budget to keep people in prison last year.
Wow.
$8.2 million to keep people incarcerated. They have like a 76% recidivism rate. And they're also the highest county in terms of the numbers that they send to state correctional institutions. They send more people back to SCIs than Philadelphia and or Allegheny County. That's ridiculous. What it shows you, though, is that when people are coming home, there's no services for them. They don't know what kind of programs are going on. And that is the work of the Reentry Coalition. You got to dig deep. If you have people coming through your doors who don't have housing, but you have a whole bunch of housing, available housing out in the community, you need to call in your housing authorities. You need to call in your landlords and say, you know what, we got people who are living in transitional housing spending hundreds of dollars a week and they're living in shacks. That's not right. But it's incumbent upon the people in the community to say enough is enough. We are not going to allow people to come home to these conditions. And let's see what we can do to make things better for folks. If you're serious about reducing the number of people who go into prison. Right? So it is bringing a little bit of hope. But it's also bringing a lot of work. And we realize that change is never easy. So when I'm going before district attorneys and commissioners and folks and tell them, guess what, you're not doing this right. They look at me like, who the heck do you think you are coming here telling us what to do with our money? But the reality is, if you do it differently, you may be able to save some money. And what we found is that for the most part, once these counties who have created these reentry coalitions really dig deep and look and see what they're doing, who's being impacted, who's not being impacted, and what the recidivism rates are, they'll say, we need to do things differently. So they implement things like day reporting centers, where they implement processes where they have case managers behind the walls of prisons to work with people to make sure that they are engaged with providers prior to them coming home from prison. Those are the kinds of things that work. Those are the kinds of things that make a difference in people's lives, and those are the kinds of things that we encourage our reentry coalitions to do. Now, there are some reentry coalitions who are stuck. They just stuck. They don't know what to do. And that's why I'm all over the state. And that's why we have Melanie, who works with a lot of the counties. She's been one of our staunchest supporters. PCCD allows communities or counties to come in and receive reentry planning grants. And with those grants, we ask that you hire a consultant. And the consultant takes you through a process where you do all those things. You assess your services, you assess who's at the table, you assess where the gaps are, and you come up with goals and objectives for all those major issues such as housing, education, employment, transportation. And also assessment. A lot of times counties don't realize who is in their jails because they don't have an assessment tool. If a person keeps coming in and out of jail 5 or 6 times a year, and they're high every time they come, well, guess what? Maybe they have a drug problem, or maybe they have an alcohol problem. But then you keep sending them to anger management because they're fighting before they come to jail. You're not helping them. So we're now asking counties to pick up and realize that there needs to be an assessment of people when they come into the booking centers, or when they get arrested. What are those baseline gut issues that people are dealing with? Because we keep spinning our wheels and we're spending money on areas that are not helping. And the reason, how do we know that? Because people keep coming back to jail. The recidivism rates are so high. So we're asking people to think smarter and to dig deeper and to really be pointed when we're spending money. We spend a lot of money on reentry, but we also know that there's a lot of money that is being wasted because it's not working. So the planning grants that I talked about, once people create those in the counties, we share those with the Department of Corrections. I sit on a task force with Department of Corrections, Probation, Parole, DHS, which is the Department of Human Services, to make sure that when applications become available, when funding becomes available, that they're really using the dollars to do what needs to be done to help people be successful. Because the bottom line with reentry is we want people to come home and be successful, and we also want to make sure that our community stays safe, right? That's the bottom line. We want our neighborhoods to be safe, and we need to have people come home and be successful. I don't know where I am on the slide.
There's this one, get to the role of churches.
The role of churches, okay.
Okay.
So here's what churches can do. Again, focus on the unique strengths and role of faith communities. You have to have acceptance. Well, you don't have to, but it's nice if you do. You have to realize that probably most people who are coming to church either have someone or know someone who has been incarcerated. That's a reality. And when you're dealing with, if you're dealing in reality, you know that you want to help people. Supposedly that's what churches are for, to help people. You also want to make sure that you build relationships. You don't have to, it's not as if you have to point the finger, oh yeah, there goes Johnny's boy, he just came home from prison. But you want to be welcoming to people, you want to show love, you want to have mercy, you want to be forgiving. But most of all, you want to help restore folks. I think that's the most important one here, restoration. And you also have to understand the needs of families. There are 51,000 people who are incarcerated in our SCIs, but there's probably over 125,000 children who are impacted, if not more, who are impacted by their parent, either one or two of them being in prison. So you have to also understand that there's going to be implications, and some of that is that trickle-down effect that's going to happen when children are left or they're left out, really. So how can you as a church embrace some of those issues and help those families to be whole? What can you do for the children? There's a lot of information, a lot of programs now that are built on unifying families, as well as helping children of incarcerated parents. There's also, on the county level, which I think is unique, and this is really something Melanie's county has implemented, there is a support group. It's an ex-offenders, a returning citizens support group, which is sort of like an AA or an NA. And I know I go completely against the grain of what probation and parole tell you. They say don't associate with anybody who's been in prison. But guess what? Those who have been in prison are probably the ones who can help you the most get over some of those hurdles. So we encourage counties, and we encourage folks to do the mentoring. Larry Coleman, his program, the mentoring program, we're taking it all over the state because it works. And we understand that it's important to have people that can identify with the areas and things that you've been doing, or the things that you've gone through, to help you over some of those bumps. Because if you haven't been in prison, it's hard for you to be able to tell somebody what to do. Because you don't know, you haven't walked in their shoes, you don't know what they're going through. So there are some other programs that we've done. We funded, currently we're funding a program for the Department of Corrections called Vivitrol, where those who have alcohol and or opiate addictions, they receive a shot once a month. And right now it's happening as they're behind prison, and there's a pilot program going on for women coming home. Dauphin County is one of the counties that are receiving this service. to help them stay off of alcohol and or opiates, and that's of course heroin, that kind of thing. What we're realizing with those programs are, if you don't have those wraparound services, if you don't have the support groups that are already in place, people are just falling off the bandwagon. If you put a person in a house and you don't give them those other services, the only thing you've done is given them a house to do whatever they used to do. So the services are really important. So I think the one thing my last piece before I sit down, is that you look at what kind of services are being offered in your communities for people. And are you willing to open the doors to those who are returning? And are you actually meeting the needs of those who are returning and offering the services that are there? That is really key. And if you don't know what those are, then I think you need to go back, start the whole strategic planning piece again, look at your recidivism rates, see what the issues are that people have as they're going into prison, and then determine which way you need to go. Okay? Thank you.
So I'm going to give you, drill down a little bit more specifically now about some of the things that churches can actually do. Go ahead. So Charla talked a little bit about, churches really should focus on what are the unique strengths that we have as people of faith. And it is that values and relationship stuff. Now, why are values and relationships so important? Well, there's research that actually shows that having a pro-social, positive social network of people around you and having a strong core of values about how you live your life are more important deterrents to getting re-involved in crime than jobs, housing, some of the other things that we typically think of. To put it the other way, the two single most important predictors of recidivism are antisocial thinking and antisocial companions, social circle. So again, relationships and values are what we're about as the church, right? So let's focus on that. Next slide. So I've sort of broken it down to 4 parts of what churches can do. Prepare, connect, invest using our treasure, and engage using our time and talents. And I'm going to drill into each of these a little bit more detail. So under the prepare, next slide. Well, the first step really is to educate yourself. Coming to this conference is a big part of educating yourself. Many people, we had 25 people attend the Healing Communities training this past Friday as a pre-conference day to educate themselves. But some specific ideas, get some training. Get the Healing Communities training. It's a full day that helps specifically to help educate churches about the criminal justice system, about the impacts of it. And this relates back to this Balancing Justice with Mercy toolkit that I talked about yesterday morning when I introduced Dean Trulier. This is the Healing Communities curriculum that we use when we do that day-long training. Read some books. The new Jim Crow we've been talking about. Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, covers some specific topics. Ministry with Prisoners and Families, that's one of the books that Dean Trulier has co-authored. And then stand by for shameless self-promotion, Grace Goes to Prison. And I say that not to promote me, because this isn't about me. It is about Marie Hamilton, the woman that book is about. She served in the prisons for 33 years in the Pennsylvania State Prison System as a volunteer. She worked with incarcerated men and women, empowered them, listened to their voices, and created things that they told her would be helpful, not only inside the prisons, but outside as well, reentry programs. Take a look at some films and host discussions. Dean Trulier talked about the film A Justice That Heals. We use this in the Healing Communities training. You can get a copy of this for $20. It's fantastic. Another film that I recommend, The House I Live In. It's available on Netflix. And again, I'll send you this PowerPoint presentation so you'll have all this information. I'll even send you information about where to order a copy of A Justice That Heals. It's $20. You can order it online. Next slide. Okay, so that's the preparation, really educating yourselves thoroughly about the issues. And then connect. See if there is a local reentry coalition that's forming in your county and partner up with them. Sit at their table. Say, I want to be part of what you're doing. Invite guest speakers from local agencies that are doing the work. Find out what they're doing. Learn about their programs and initiatives. Ask them what they need and how your congregation can support them. Go and visit a nearby county jail or state prison or federal prison if there's one near you. Visit the agencies in your community, in your county that are doing the work. And start building some of those formal and informal relationships. Next step is to invest. Invest in the organizations that are doing the work. Many of these organizations, agencies that are doing reentry programs, that are running and providing services to people, are bootstrapped organizations, nonprofits that are stretched to the absolute limit, can never find enough funding to keep their programs running, just constantly struggling. And it shouldn't be that way. So invest in them. Ask those agencies. Ask John Dye Harrell, who runs the Center for Returning Citizens. Ask me what the Lancaster County RMO, the Reentry Coalition that we run in Lancaster. We offer case management, transitional housing, wraparound services, all those things Charla was talking about. Ask us what would be most helpful, and then find ways for your congregation to engage in that and support that. Organize fundraisers for local agencies and their programs. Consider writing them into your budget, an ongoing, monthly or annual donation to keep those agencies and programs going. Next slide. And then engage, using your time and talents. Partner up with existing agencies, find out what they need in terms of volunteers, mentors, advocates. These 4 roles that are listed here come from Daniel Hunter's excellent organizing guide to building a movement to end mass incarceration. So if you look at these roles, helpers who work on the front lines with individuals who have needs, advocates who see needs but also understand the systems and can help people navigate through and get what they need, organizers, bringing together people who are hurting and people outside the system to apply pressure to change the rules of the system, and then rebels, public protests, sit-ins, writing letter campaigns. So across those 4 roles, each of us is going to have our own unique strengths and gifts that we bring to this, but there's something for everyone. There's something everyone can do in these roles. Next slide. Now, I want to throw out a few don'ts for us. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't go running off saying, well, we're going to start up a new program. We're going to form a nonprofit. We're going to go organize, a group to do this and that. Find out first what is already being done and see how you can support that. As Charla said, don't try to fulfill roles that are really outside of our expertise as the church. Don't try to be addictions counselors or mental health counselors. Don't say, oh, we're going to start up a halfway house and try and run that. Find the professionals in the community that are doing that work, and again, support them. Find out how you can partner up with them to make their work have broader reach and be more impactful. And then this last one. This is so important. And I've seen a lot of people with wonderful intentions. And they say, we're going to help this individual, and we're going to rally around them, and we're going to support them, invest a tremendous amount of time and resources and emotional energy in that individual, and then they relapse, or they commit another crime, or they steal from the church, And then people say, oh, I am so done. That's it. I'm out. We can't do that. We cannot do that. We've got to be in this work for the long haul because people do relapse. People do return to crime. People do fall off. And so I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, would I abandon my own child the first time they mess up, or the second or the third? Would I walk away from my own family member? If you wouldn't do it to your own family member, don't do it to one of our brothers and sisters in Christ. Next slide. So I want to share a few specific examples. In Lancaster County, we've used the Healing Communities curriculum. We have been training churches in Lancaster County for about 4 years now. We have right now 35 churches that we've trained, little teams of people from those congregations. Now somebody this morning said, that's awesome, 35 churches. I said, yeah, but there are 750 churches in Lancaster County. So I'm wondering, why has it only been 35 that we've been able to get to come? But they have come alongside of our Reentry Coalition and done amazing things that have had enormous impact on the lives of lots of men and women returning home to Lancaster County. Donating bags of love, toiletries, basic shampoo, soap, a washcloth, a towel, some clean underwear, and warm socks. I have had women who have broken down and cried when we've handed them their bag of love that has been donated by a local church when they see, when they see that it has tampons and pads in it, and a pair of warm socks, and some clean underwear. Donate clothing. Our churches have donated clothing for people going through our reentry employment program. They've funded the printing of this little community resources guide. This little handy pocket guide for Lancaster County lists all the different agencies that provide food, clothing, community meals, drug and alcohol services, mental health services, housing, transportation. We've put it all in one little pocket guide, but it took some money to get these printed. A church stepped forward and donated that money, so we can now distribute one of these to every person coming into Lancaster County Prison, so they have it, they can start looking at it, start thinking about how do I connect with resources when I get out. We have a church that provides first month's rent and security deposit money for people who have gone through our intensive reentry program. We have had churches that have sponsored returning citizens that go through our intensive program, so they will pay for that individual's transitional housing and intensive case management for a period of time. We've had churches that have provided gas cards, McDonald's cards, and a bag of coins for the prison vending machine so that a family can go visit their loved one far away, because otherwise they weren't going to be able to afford it. We've been invited to go in and speak at churches. Next slide. We've had churches that have donated the use of their space for the weekly meetings of our successful Returning Citizens Mentoring Support Group. We have a small collaborative group of churches that provide training for our mentors, and then those mentors, those community mentors, are at every meeting of the successful Returning Citizens Group to just listen to what the formerly incarcerated people in that room are talking about, what some of their needs and challenges and barriers are. And then those mentors, it's a beautiful thing, at the end of those weekly meetings, those mentors come up to the people. They may have heard Joe say, well, after 7 months of searching, I finally got a call back from an employer who's called me in for an interview next Tuesday, but I've got no idea how I'm going to get there. Those community mentors are going to be on it, on the case. As soon as that meeting's over, they're surrounding Joe saying, where do you need to get to? What time's your interview? We're going to get you there. We're going to make sure that happens. We've had our partner churches have tutored in our GED program that we run at our Career Link. They come in and review people's resumes with them, give them a little shot of confidence, help them beef up their resumes to more positively reflect what they have to offer to an employer. We have a partner church that runs a support group for families who have a loved one who's incarcerated. And one of our churches, this was very cool. Last year, Naomi Leapart, who was here running the worship services yesterday and Friday evening, she took the Healing Communities training last November, and she said, I want to do something within my church, but I don't want to just like run off and do a project. I want to educate people first. She decided children of incarcerated parents, Christmas was coming. So she, in her church, they did a book discussion using a book called What Will Happen to Me, which is the stories of children whose parents are incarcerated. They watched a film called Shadows, which is about the impacts of incarceration on children. They had discussion groups within their church, and then they partnered with Angel Tree, an existing organization. They found out the names and information about some families in Lancaster County where children had incarcerated parents. They purchased the gifts for those children, but they went one step further. They weren't satisfied to just go drop the gifts off and let Angel Tree distribute them. They wrote letters to each of those families and invited them to come, and they held a Christmas party at their church and invited those children and their caregivers to come and personally gave them the gifts that they had bought, sat down and talked with them, learned about what their lives were like. Amazing, amazing example. Oh, no, there are a few more examples. And then there's another level of advocacy work. We had a group of clergy just last week from our Healing Communities congregations who went to the prison board meeting to confront our prison board because they had just removed protections for LGBTQ people from the prison's code of ethics. It was in there, and the prison board removed those protections. And a group of clergy said, that's not right. And they showed up in force at the prison board meeting and confronted, spoke truth to power. Our partner congregations have protested outside of the Lancaster County Prison when inmates brought to light some of the really appalling conditions inside the prison. They've written op-eds to the newspaper to speak up about some of these issues. This summer we had over 150 people from our Healing Communities partner congregations that participated in a summer-long ecumenical learning series about mass incarceration and racism. And we have a seat on our board of directors for our Reentry Coalition that is specifically for representatives from the faith community. So those are just a few of the ways that churches can get involved, but we urge you to get involved, follow some of these steps, find out who's doing the work in your communities, and ask how you can come alongside of them and partner to expand the reach. So that's what we have at this point. That's a lot of material to cover, but we'd be happy, Charla and I, to entertain any questions that you might have.
Do you have any more questions?
That guy. Hello?
Thank you, Melanie, for all the work that you do. One of the things we did touch on today was the bail system and the cost to families. I always thought, well, you get arrested, you pay your bail, and then if you show up, you get it back. I didn't understand that if you have to go through a bail bondsman if you don't have like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you don't get that money back, or you get a small percentage back. So my root question in this is, with all these fees, if someone is arrested, they can't get out on bail, but they're in prison, if they are found not guilty of whatever they're arrested for, do they still have these fees for the shampoo, the phone calls, and those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, for whatever period of time you are incarcerated, you have to pay for whatever you need inside the prison while you're incarcerated. So you don't get that money. They don't give you a refund.
Right, and even
on that.
if you weren't guilty.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And in our, just to be clear, in our county jails across the country, on average, 62% of all the people locked up in county jails are pretrial detainees. They're primarily because they can't afford bail. And some proportion of them will be found not guilty. But, yeah, they've already had all kinds of things assessed against them that they have to pay.
Jim, I'm coming over with Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Okay, first a request, and I'm talking to myself because I'm going to be with my two Republican legislators tomorrow, my state senator and my representative. And I'm going to talk about all we've done today through a lens of public safety. What helps public safety? Good reentry helps public safety. Treating prisoners humanely helps public safety. Reasonable fees in the prison might help public safety, but only if you think about the collateral consequences, the collateral damage, which the legislators... I used to be a government budgeting person. I trained, okay? It's an obvious thing, oh, put the fees where they deserve, without thinking the collateral damage of putting it on a reentry citizen. You left out one incredibly important piece on complications of reentry. I call it the drive to survive, okay? If we make it hard for somebody to reenter successfully, they will survive somehow, and it might not be pretty. We need to keep hammering on the drive to survive may conflict with public safety if we don't help people reenter. So that's part of public safety. Two simple, dumb things my church has been doing. We have a ministry that's 12 years old this fall, helping people in prison and their families. We partner with a local nonprofit that, from the get-go, the head of the nonprofit came and said, things they do, every Monday that nonprofit hosts women from the local work release who are mandated to get a job in 30 days or go back to jail. They had one copy of the classified ads, and there was some pushy-shovey because none of the women had been incarcerated for good interpersonal skills. Okay, since then, 12 years, my congregation members each Sunday bring the Sunday classifieds to the church service. It's happening today, and members of my group take the classifieds to that nonprofit. I'm going to be taking a few spares into work release tomorrow afternoon. And guess what? Women in prison with lousy computer skills have classified ads. Something that is shorter lived. We found out that a woman arrived at a local halfway house wearing orange prison garb turned inside out and no underwear because she'd been transferred to 3 county prisons. A mild-mannered, gentle lady in our congregation started buttonholing people coffee hour. We have an undercover fund so that a woman arriving at a halfway house or work release that's indigent can be taken out to buy new, clean underwear. Simple, dumb, and incredibly important. So those are 2 things that any church can do.
Newspapers and underwear. I think we can do this, people.
The other piece, I beg you to training and education, the most important thing that you can do is educate who you're dealing with the concept of boundaries. Mentors who don't know boundaries will help too much and be burned, and as soon as somebody gets burned badly, they put the newspapers and the idea of mentors will go down the drain.
Yeah, that's why step 1 in this process was prepare. You must educate yourself.
Don't say if failure happens, say when, because it will happen. And I'm a volunteer prison chaplain since 2005. People learn not from experience, but from thinking about experience. And our relapse is part of recovery from addiction if they learn from it. So expect the relapse to happen and help the people learn from it and have boundaries so that your church organization isn't harmed.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for those great examples, Jim. Laura.
This is actually just a request for you to say a little bit more about the summer-long ecumenical learning series. I think it's a really powerful thing that you all have done, and I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about the specifics, what that looks like, and if there's even a plan or something that you could
Yeah, in fact, actually, somebody approached us and said, oh, we want to do this whole same series in Harrisburg. I said, have at it. So what we did was each month we had a different book. 1 month we had people read the new Jim Crow on their own, and then we scheduled a date to just bring everybody who had read it together to discuss it. 1 month we had everybody read Just Mercy on their own and brought everybody together to discuss it. We had brought people together to watch The House I Live In. So each of these we had local people who were engaged in doing reentry work, engaged in some of these issues, come in and facilitate discussion. So yeah, we'll be happy to share our sort of lineup of books and films that we did. And then at the end we had a half-day teach-in. And by the way, all of our Healing Communities partner churches, they donated space to hold these book and discussions and film screenings. They donated food so we could have snacks and drinks. They donated space for the half-day teach-in. So yeah, lots of great, very tangible, and sometimes extremely simple ways that churches can get involved. But I'll be happy to share. I can send out, when I get the contact list from Sandy, I'll send out the lineup of what we did for the summer learning series as well. Yeah, Tom.
Would you repeat, you made reference to the fact that the community that exists in a faith community as being superseding any other service that someone can receive. The support.
Oh, yeah. So let me go back to this slide because I do think this is really important. Let me get to it. Okay. So these are the things that churches are about, right? This is who we are as people of faith. We are about mercy, redemption, acceptance, love, forgiveness, right? That's at the core. And it really doesn't matter what specific faith tradition we're from. This is stuff that's at the core of every major faith tradition in the world. Okay? So if you drill down to what those sort of characteristics of us as people of faith are about, they're about values and relationships. And so interestingly, research shows that the two single most important predictors of recidivism, somebody winding up reincarcerated, is antisocial thinking and antisocial companions, people who they hang out with. And so, if we as people of faith can really provide the underlying values system for people and the positive relationships, we, the church, are addressing the two most important predictors of recidivism and helping to turn that around. And Dean Trulier, he didn't bring this up yesterday when he preached, but he often says when he speaks to a group that there was a survey done where, with a group of people, as soon as they were released from prison, that asked them, what do you think is going to be the most important one or two things that will contribute to your success now that you're out of prison? And they said, housing and jobs. A year later, they went back to those who had not been reincarcerated and said, what have been the most important factors in you not being reincarcerated? And they said, a circle of people around me to help keep me accountable, support me, encourage me, offer me some hope. So even though people thought at first, housing and job is what I got to have, what really made the difference was that circle of support. And that's who we are as church. So let's be about what we're supposed to be about. Yes, Lawrence.
Well, somebody had a mic.
Yep, he's coming.
And if we can make this the last question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, my name is Lawrence, and today, Sunday, and y'all talking about church. I'm going to try to keep it on a spiritual level then. You know, I'm a returning citizen, as y'all call it. And, you know, people that I meet, I used to tell them I'm a crash dummy. Because every time I touch the steering wheel and want to be in charge, I end up in prison. So, you know, I was sitting here listening. I was listening to a lady talk over there about a person that was involved in the Latinos and stuff. And it was a powerful testimony, even though I was air hustling, as we call it. And, you know, God is good, though, because today it feels good to see Chaplain Colvin on this side of the fence. You know, he placed a beautiful lady in my life, Charla. You know, we had a tendency, you know, to have burners on sometimes because we look at the behavior and we don't look at the Savior. You know, we can go from felon to being forgiven. You know, God can take a mess, turn it into a message, then turn it into a ministry. You know, people are crying out for help. People are standing at the gate. You know, the harvest is plenty, labor is few. You know, it's a struggle out here. You know, just people are coming from the system and they just throw you into society. You know, people just don't know about help, don't know where to turn, don't know where to go. And you know, our struggles have struggles. I know my struggles have struggles. You know, it was a question asked today, how many people are stressed out, you know. It ain't only people in prison stressed out, we are stressed out. All the hands was raised. We build our own, some people build their own prisons within themselves and don't even know it is incarcerated on this side of the fence, in the community. You know, but I'm going back to, you know, God is good though, you know, where's the love though? You know, where's the compassion at though, you know? Like I was telling Charla on the way here today, I just, you know, thank God that God ain't, you know, the groundhogs ain't delivering my mail. You know, I could have been dead years ago. I've been in some places, walk around lifeless and just, you know, wherever I go, people come around me, you know. Young men call me Uncle Lou. Never seen him a day in my life, but I'm Uncle Lou though. You know, it ain't me. It's just, I give it to God, but God though. You know, He had came into my life, you know, and it's Him though. It got to be Him. It ain't me. It's most definitely me because I'm going to take it back to the beginning. I am a crash dummy. And if I would touch that steering wheel, I would mess it up. I'll wreck a Rolls Royce, whatever kind of vehicle there is to be wrecked, I will wreck it if I touch that steering wheel. So I don't want to be in control no more. You know, it's like today, I'm going back to a church that I haven't been there in a while when we leave from here. You know, East Shore Baptist right out here on Jonestown Road. And then, you know, I feel that I got to get back up under that cover because I went astray a little bit. You know, I ain't where I should be, but I ain't where I was. Thank you.
Thank you, Lon. Thank you all. Be the church.